Hi, I'm Lenny. I'm one of the founders at my current company is called GreenSpark, and I will give you a little bit more background about myself in a little bit. And today's session will be about different tools that you can use in order to hopefully build an MVP, iterate quickly, and learn something. All right, so I've tried to structure the next 45 minutes in a way that I wish someone had really presented to me 7 years ago when I started on my journey as an entrepreneur, trying to navigate building the technology for my first company, which was called Mamok. So I want the session to be as interactive and understandable as possible. So if anyone has any questions, just pop them in the Q&A. Or if I lose you at any point, don't hesitate to ask, and I'm happy to repeat things as well. Also, this will be shareable, so we'll get this sent out to everyone that wants it, and then you can also use the links that are provided within the presentation. To start off, a little bit about me. I guess, maybe I've had a slightly different journey where I've worn many different hats, working many different jobs. But I think ultimately this has prepared me really well for being a founder, where you suddenly have to take on every job that exists in your company before you can hire for the role. Growing up, I never really knew what I wanted to be, and I probably still don't really know what I want to be when I grow up. My background is in marketing, economics, and I'm also a full stack software engineer. I founded 2 companies so far. The first was called Mamok, which was a marketplace for sustainable products. We were the first in the UK to execute on an idea like that, grew to hundreds of brands across Europe, raised VC funding, were named among the top 100 UK social enterprises, and I had the awesome opportunity to be incubated at King's College in London, as well as at Cambridge University. This is really where I learned what it entails to be a founder, and also brought about the idea for my latest company, GreenSpark. So at GreenSpark, where I'm currently the CEO and one of the founders, we enable companies to easily and seamlessly integrate tangible environmental impact into their business model so that they can take action on issues that matter, serve rapidly growing market demand, and engage their audience. We're on a mission to really prove that taking action for our planet isn't just good for the world, but it's good for business. And now to get started, what is a lean MVP? For anyone that doesn't know, an MVP is a minimum viable product, which is the smallest thing that you can create to start gathering feedback from your users. We all have these grand ideas for our companies and where we want to see them in the future. But the best thing founders can do is to break these ideas down so that they can start creating their product. So following the lean model, the idea is to get through each of the stages shown here as quickly as possible so that you can iterate quickly and learn as much as possible. So firstly, you need to build your product, which is what we're going to be discussing today, about the tech stacks that you can use in order to easily and quickly achieve this. Then you should have different tools in place in order to measure your results. These can be signups, visits, time spent, whatever it is that you'd like to figure out. But what's important here is that we predetermine what we want to learn, set some hypothesis, and then ensure that we're gathering the correct data. So once we have this data, we can then analyze it to draw our conclusions and iterate quickly to make things better and learn and move forward. What's important to remember when you're building your MVP and iterating is to really always make small incremental changes and see how those affect your KPIs. If you make a huge change, then you're unable to know what the difference in KPIs can be attributed to. For example, at GreenSpark, when we're working on an ads campaign for Facebook, let's say, we'll run an ad for a week with our initial copy and image, and then we'll slowly change things one by one, always again letting it run for a week in between changes. That way we can really see whether changing the image, for example, affects our conversion rates, if that's our KPI, or our click rate, or whatever the KPI might be, versus changing the subject line. And this in total really allows us to make incremental changes to ensure that after a couple of weeks, we're achieving the best possible results. So a really good example of building an MVP, for example, is Rent the Runway. The first time that, before they built their online platform, they held a rental pop-up shop for one day where people could rent the clothes and bring them back. This allowed them to test their idea, see whether people wanted to rent clothes, how they rent them, if they bring them back, and what the costs are involved in, for example, cleaning, restocking, etc. If they then would have wanted to take it even further, they could have hosted the same pop-up shop again without allowing people to try clothes on. And this would have showed them if people would rent without being allowed to try on, and validate further whether their business model would work online. And after they did that, they could really, for example, take it even one step further and run the same pop-up again, but this time only show people pictures in order to see whether people would rent without even being able to touch or see the clothes. After they gather all this data and they know that, all of their hypotheses have been validated, then they can move on with, building their big platform and spending a lot of capital in doing so. So my goal today is to try and show you to not be scared about starting your technology, and also to give you a hopefully slightly comprehensive toolkit from which you can get started. So all of the tools and stacks that we're going to be talking about today are tools that I've used in the past, which you can learn without needing to necessarily be a developer or hire a developer. Of course, this isn't an exhaustive list, and there's always new cool tools coming out. And if you're new to this, then a quick explanation: a tech stack is simply the systems that you're planning on using in terms of your technology. So a short moment on my learnings and how I really came into this MVP and no-code world. So when I founded my first company, which was a marketplace called Mamok, we had no idea what we were doing. And it was also really a different time. This was over 7 years ago. So all of these amazing no-code tools that have come out in recent years weren't really available yet. So what did we do? Like many people, we decided that we needed to hire engineers in order to build our platform. So we sold our cars and all of the other things that we had in order to raise the money. And then I personally spoke with over 100 agencies in order to make sure that I found the right one. And of course, spoiler alert, they were definitely not the right one. And actually, I've never really personally worked with an agency that was truly the right one. Sorry for anyone that's listening, if you're running an agency. But then the agency that we finally settled on, they then, of course, made a project proposal with us. And then they spent the next 8 months developing our platform. And when it finally launched, we immediately realized that there were so many things that we hadn't thought about, so many things that needed to change. But when you're hiring an agency, making changes is usually pretty slow and very expensive, meaning that you can't really go through this MVP cycle quickly enough. And you can't learn and iterate and change your business model in order to respond to the things that you're learning. So after this experience, I decided that technological development always needs to be done in-house. And at first, I started using no-code tools before learning how to actually code. So my favorite thing to tell people when they ask me to give advice is to really start simple, start lean, but start. Even if you're just building a simple page to collect email addresses or launching an Instagram profile, whatever it is that you might be doing that kind of dumbs down that big idea that you have, anything that you do today will create interest for what you want to do later on. So when we're thinking about our tech stack, we need to be thinking about what we're going to be using it for and how long we intend to use it for as well. So the scalability of the stack that we're using. Is this, for example, something that we're only going to be using for a couple of months, or should we be able to scale to thousands of daily users? It's important here to really stay realistic, just like you're dumbing down your grand idea. Make sure that what you're building is fit to get you to that next step, which might be validating your idea through, for example, building an email list, or maybe your next step is getting investment in order to hire that expensive engineering team, or maybe it is getting your first paying users in order to bootstrap your company. Whatever your goal is, your tech stack should be able to match that. So what's nice about all of the solutions that we're talking about today is that you don't need to worry about one huge piece of engineering, which is the DevOps side of things, which are your servers, your load balancers, whatever it is that that's on the DevOps side, since these are all already built in and the tools will generally nicely scale with you. So here, we're looking at some tools that I like to use for building a landing page. So I highly recommend Webflow or Squarespace. Both are pretty simple drag and drop builders, although Webflow is more comparable to Photoshop for the internet and is definitely has a much steeper learning curve than Squarespace. With both of the tools, you can quite easily integrate your email collection and your marketing tools such as MailChimp, MailerLite, HubSpot, whatever it is that you like to use there in order to start collecting those emails and validating that idea. The one important thing to think about whenever you're using a tool that has templates is that you always really want to test before you buy, and test it against key metrics, like running a Google speed test in order to ensure that, you know, the theme that you're buying isn't going to be slow and therefore Google is going to punish you in their organic search results, or making sure that you test it on tablet and mobile to see whether it's responsive, and again, so that, you know, Google doesn't punish you for that. You don't really want to spend days or months building your MVP only to find out that actually you didn't test these things and you need to start over. So what I've done is I've structured the next couple of tech stacks according to their business model. And of course, this again isn't an exhaustive list of business models, but as I said, you need to start somewhere. Also, if you have a model that's not covered, feel free to ask at the end, or you can always drop me an email or a note on LinkedIn and I can try and suggest some useful tools for you. So a direct-to-consumer business model is the first one that we're starting with. And this simply means that you're manufacturing or buying products and selling them directly to your customers. This is super popular with huge brands like Casper, Girlfriend Collective, BarkBox, and a million others using the model. And from a tech stack perspective, it's also the most straightforward and easy to implement. There's so many awesome tools around today that you can use in order to achieve this. My favorite always being usually on the left-hand side of the slide. Shopify has really taken over pretty much everything on the D2C side. Their pricing is very fair. Their usability is very nice, and if you use a plugin like Shogun, you can really customize it to make it look and feel kind of exactly like how you want, in order again to kind of test whether customers want your product before you hire that expensive agency to complete it. Then if you would like something more powerful, Webflow is again has a much more steep learning curve, but again you can use what they call clones, not themes, where you can find a lot of things to kind of help you get started. And then the last one is WooCommerce, or which of course works in combination with a page builder like Elementor or Divi. Here the question with WooCommerce always is that it is a lot more involved. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. You need to look also out for your own servers and hosting. And while there are tools out or hosting companies out there that claim to automate that for you, in my experience, I found that it is definitely the one where the most things can go wrong and you can end up with a very clunky website. but it is still a pretty good tool nonetheless if you know how to use it. The next business model is subscription business, or for example, SaaS tools. These are now pretty much the norm and are very attractive to investors because, of course, you have a predictable source of revenue. So if someone subscribes today, the idea, unless they've churned, right? The idea is that next month you'll be building on that revenue, or tomorrow, etc. And therefore it allows you to plan nicely and allows you to not start at zero every month. So here again, we have two really easy tools on how to implement this. With Shopify, as we touched on earlier, it is much quicker and easier to achieve. And with WooCommerce, there are some, as we just said, it is a little bit more involved. The one thing to figure out is that for to run a subscriptions business, you'll need to add subscription tools on top of your CMS platform in order to be able to bill users on a monthly basis or yearly basis. The next tech stack, or the next business model, is a marketplace. So this is what we'd built when we started our first company. These are companies like Amazon, eBay, Etsy, Wolf and Badger. You know, they unite buyers on one side, sellers on the other side. And here you always have the chicken and egg problem, where when you start, you need vendors to attract customers, but you also need customers to attract vendors. And I think this is a whole other presentation. In terms of tech stack, we again have Shopify and WooCommerce. As you can see, they are super versatile and can really be used for a lot of different things. The only thing that's really changed is the type of plugin that you're using, because you don't need a plugin in order to charge your users on a monthly basis, although you might, and then you can combine that. But you have special marketplace plugins like Webcool or Dokan that allow you to very easily create an admin where your vendors can log in, manage their inventory, etc. And then you also have more business model specific tools like ShareTribe or Arcadia. They're really built for building marketplaces. The one thing to remember is that they might not support all of your business models. And all of these tools are very opinionated, meaning that you can't, you might hit a wall where you're unable to achieve what it is that you want to achieve, simply because the tool is opinionated in a way that it doesn't allow you to do everything, which is why generally, even if a company starts on one of these types of tools, if the business model requires it and is too advanced, then you will at some point need to move into some more advanced kind of personal development builds. And the last one, which is actually kind of a bonus, is Bubble. Bubble is, in my opinion, the most advanced no-code tool out there. Definitely approached with caution. There is a huge learning curve, and it allows you to do a lot of the things that an engineer would be able to do, because it allows you to build your own data structure in your database. And then building on that, it allows you to build flows where your website or app interacts with that database. And it can get extremely complicated and convoluted, but it is a very, very powerful tool. So now that we've covered the tech stack, I think it's important to quickly touch on the next part of the Lean MVP, which is gathering data, so that you can really learn and iterate quickly. So as we said earlier, when you start, you need to make sure that your KPIs are somewhat set in order to ensure that you're collecting the right data. So one of the main metrics, of course, is tracking on-site visitors, or if it's an app, in-app users, and then The main stats around that would be things like time spent, bounce rate. So, when a customer or when a user comes onto the page, are they actually looking at that page, or are they leaving straight away? Building conversion funnels. So what is it that you want your user to achieve? What are you counting as a conversion? Is it, for example, an email sign up, or a purchase, or booking a demo? There's many different types of conversions, and it really helps to understand what are the most important for you are, and what the funnels are. So what the steps are that customers are taking in order to for you to achieve that conversion. And then finally, I always like to also have some statistics around cost versus revenue per conversion that I'm achieving. So how much is it costing me to acquire a new customer, or a new email lead, a demo booking? Because then that really also helps you plan your marketing budget, but you can then also look at taking steps in order to reduce and improve that. In terms of tools, it's super important to have all of these set up. So of course, an analytics tool like Google Analytics, Heap, Segment, Mixpanel, Amplitude. When you actually go onto their websites, you'll be able to see which one is the best for your use case. I generally recommend using Heap because they have a very generous free tier. And in terms of no code development, it's really just drag and drop, and you can get some really amazing insights. Hotjar is also fun. You can then see how your users are. It actually records the screen, and you can then see how your users are interacting with your app. This also helps you find bugs and kind of things that aren't looking the way that you want them to on different devices. And the last points are using something like Google Optimize in order to A/B test your app or tool. You might find that a different headline has a direct impact on one of your main stats, or you might find that simply changing the color of a button has an impact on your main stats. Again, it's really important to make these changes incrementally so that you understand what is causing the impact on your stats. Because if you change the button and the headline and a million other things, then if your conversion rate improves, you wouldn't know which of those caused it. And you wouldn't know if maybe you can push that conversion rate up even further. If you had made these incremental changes, then you would know, oh, actually changing the headline has no effect, but changing the button does this. And then you can kind of move through your cycle like that. And then always important to run speed tests on your tools in order to ensure that they are working as Google would like you to. So the next part is working as Google would like you to. And so here the question is always, how are people finding you? And once you figured that out, then do more of that. So when you think about your sales channels like ads, cold outreach, etc., the best ones are often the cheapest, like email lists or organic search. However, in order for you to appear in your users' organic search or your potential users' organic search, you need to really optimize for this. You need to research what the keywords might be that people are searching for in order to ensure that you're ranking highly for them. And so here on this page, we have the technical basics of a search result. At the top, we have the URL, then the meta title and meta description. And these are the first things your users will see. So you really need to make sure that they're relevant. Google also uses these as well as the content on your page to determine relevancy, which is why keyword density on a page is super important. And finally, Google or Bing also check your domain authority by looking for backlinks. So backlinks are who's linking to your page and what and what is their domain authority. So for example, if you have a link from Cambridge University, that's of course much more valuable than if you have a link from Joe's Coffee down the road. So these are all things that Google and other search engines take into account. And one bonus for SEO, which I'm also not 100% if it's true, but a lot of people have told me that you should buy your domains for as long as possible in advance. So generally, a domain registrar will allow you to buy from anywhere between 1 year to 10 years. And if you buy for 10 years, then Google thinks, or search engines think that, oh, this domain must have a bigger authority because you've committed for a long time. So once you've optimized your keywords and meta tags, etc., you need to measure them. And so here are a couple of tools to help with that. Of course, there's others that are not on the list, like SEMrush, that are also really powerful. But what I really like to do is I really like to use Moz and install the toolbar in my Chrome browser. And this allows me to see things like domain authority, Google Trends, and kind of get an idea of what all of these things mean. And as you have it on and are browsing websites, then you'll quickly start getting a feeling for what kind of works and what doesn't. Then for researching keywords and tracking performance as well as the competition, something like Ahrefs works really well. Although these types of tools do start getting slightly more expensive. Next up, we have some tools for emails. So at GreenSpark, we actually use one that's not listed here, which is ActiveCampaign, but it's not listed here because I really wouldn't recommend it. So the most important stats, in my opinion, here are open rates, click rates, and conversions. Of course, you might have something different that's important to you. And I again here like to follow the lean model and iterate quickly on things like imagery, subject line, introduction, in order to really figure out what works best with my audience. Because small incremental changes can have really a huge impact on your metrics. So finally, what you really want to achieve as part of the lean model, right, is you want to learn about your customers. So so here are a couple of tools that I like to use in order to speak or gather feedback from my customers. My favorite on the list is definitely Typeform. They have quite a generous free tier, and it's has the nicest, smoothest, easiest to use UI. But I've added some other ones here too, in case you have a different preference. And also, you really shouldn't be afraid to speak with your customers personally as well. I think today we live in a world where everything happens digitally, but you can actually learn a lot from having calls with your customers. What we do at GreenSpark is I try to for the first 100 customers get as many of them on an actual call in order to understand why they've signed up, what they're using my app for, why they might want to actually churn, if they've tried other alternatives, what it is that they'd like to see. And that way I can prioritize what I need to be building and where I can make improvements. Also, when we have big feature releases, I again try to follow the same model where we always try to speak to some customers before releasing in order to understand whether what we're going to be releasing makes sense, but also after releasing to see whether we've met their expectations, whether they have ideas for improvement, all of these things. So as a final bonus, I've added a couple of tools here that I think are definitely, well, they're definitely no-code tools and definitely super interesting when building an MVP. At GreenSpark, I actually built our whole first MVP using various tools are listed on through this presentation. We had our whole app was built using Webflow. We connected Webflow with our database, which was basically a Google Sheet using Zapier. And like that, we managed to build something within 3 weeks ourselves without needing to hire anyone. So Zapier and Integromat are super useful for connecting different tools together and making them speak. So for example, someone signs up for your email newsletter, you can then have a Zapier or Integromat send that into a Google Sheet. Then when it enters the Google Sheet, you might want to send it on to a different service. And that way you can build something that's pretty impressive without needing to know much about development. And finally, it's the two tools that we use, or that I've used in the past. Privacy is one that we use at the moment to stay GDPR compliant. It's pretty cool. They scan everything and ensure that that everything, your policies remain up to date as you add new tools to your stack, and terms feed for creating contracts. Always important to kind of stay compliant. And like with everything, it's always good to look at the competition. So for example, you know, companies like Anthropology or others have spent hundreds of millions of dollars optimizing their conversion rates. So you don't always need to reinvent the wheel. Depending on your business model, it's always good to map out the competition, but also always good to kind of look at the largest players, see what they're doing, look at some best practice, and kind of start implementing that. One example that, or one tool that I always like to use here is I have Wapalizer installed in my Chrome browser, so that whenever I land on a website, I can see their tech stack. And it's quite funny, actually, the more you do this, the more you understand what different tech stacks look like. And for example, now when I come onto a Shopify website, I don't really need Wapalizer because they all look very similar at the end of the day. And yeah, thanks very much for listening. Get in touch. Here's my email. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.